Tori Petry here on Skype. We are doing a series where we are talking with some analysts around the league. And joining me today is ESPN's NFL insider, Field Yates. Field, how are you holding up in all of this self-isolation?
Yeah, Tori, it's been an interesting time. And I think that the most important thing has just been to keep perspective on it all, although it's not the most enjoyable time to be spending every day and all day inside of our apartment, which is like 450 square feet. And my wife and I feel like we're probably stepping on each other's toes all day. We certainly are very fortunate to be healthy and to continue to work right now. So I think the most important thing for us has been keeping perspective and welcoming any and all suggestions of movie rentals and Netflix series to allow us to get through this time, which who knows how long it will actually be.
Yeah, I love all of the Netflix recommendations coming our way right now. Field, free agency looked so different this year considering the situation in the world right now. What did it look like for you as you covered all these moves happening around the league?
Yeah, a little bit surreal, Tori, when it felt like everybody else was sort of suspending reality in some ways, or at least altering their reality. People who work in offices are moving back home, and people that maybe work in a sales-driven job are having to kind of put all operations on hold. And yet the NFL, in some ways, was just business as usual. And really during that first week of free agency, including the legal negotiating window, it felt like things were not exactly normal, but a lot closer to our normal. And as we have gotten to this next wave of free agency that is the precursor to the draft, but normally right now we'd be covering pro days and we'd be tracking who was visiting which team and who was working out which prospect and things like that. And instead, we're basically just in a holding pattern. Even though the draft is still going to go on as scheduled, our preparation is a little bit different. So it definitely had some elements that we were accustomed to. But for the most part, this was a whole different world than we have ever lived in. And, you know, again, I'm not a medical expert, but it certainly seems like this is not something that's going to necessarily change before the draft. And it could be longer than that.
Well, we will see what happens, but there's still NFL news to talk about, of course, which I think is a welcome relief for a lot of people who are stuck inside their homes right now. So let's start talking about Lions free agency and the moves that they made. What stuck out to you as some of the biggest ones that they made in free agency this year?
Yeah, there's a lot to choose from, right? It's not exactly a reformed defense entirely, but for the Lions, it felt like, hey, we have an idea of how we want to play, and this offseason is about attracting as many players that fit exactly the type of roles that we need to fill on offense and defense, and I'll especially focus on the defense, both in terms of football ability and also football character. So the moves that I thought were most notable, I mean, I suppose you always kind of follow the money, right? Which were the ones that were most lucrative, but you know, in aggregate, the deals that really sort of stand out to me is that I think you added impact players in the secondary. Certainly, you'd expect Desmond Trufant to be a huge part of your pass coverage next year, an accomplished player who's got Pro Bowl level ability when fully healthy. And then Daron Harmon, acquired in a trade, is somebody that may not necessarily fill up the box score with stats every Sunday that pop off the page, but having watched Daron since the inception of his NFL career, I can just say with great certainty that he's about as reliable of a player as you'll find in that role that I think he'll occupy under Corey Unwin and also Matty P in his contributions on the defensive side of the ball. Jimmy Collins is going to be somebody that's going to do something every week that's going to wow, a guy that is so unique, kind of a unicorn defensively at the linebacker spot. And then Danny Shelton, a player that I know people in New England will tell you for a good chunk of last season, if not the entirety of it, was a Pro Bowl caliber defensive lineman, big hulking guy who's got great athleticism for a player of his ability. So I know that was a lot, but I would just say that in total, the defensive moves to me felt like one big sensible shift in terms of finding the right kind of players for this Lions defense.
Those moves you mentioned, a lot of them Patriots players coming over to join Matty P in Detroit. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, you know something, Tori, I know people make a big deal out of this in football, and they try to say, like, is there not, and this happens around the league, right? Whether it's, in Detroit with Matt Patricia, whether in Bob Quinn, whether it's in Miami where Brian Flores, of course, another former Patriots coach, or Joe Judge, a former Patriots assistant and special teams coordinator, now the Giants head coach. This happens everywhere, though, and it's familiarity. And I think this actually happens in life, just in general, right? I mean, you find you meet someone who begins a startup, and they often hire people that they trust, people that they know what to expect out of them every single day. And in football, there's so few practice reps now, and that's going to be even more reduced with what we have taking place globally right now. But in a normal year, there are so few practice reps, and there are so few opportunities to coach the things that you want to coach, and install the things that you want to install, that a lot of times your most sensible look is always at the guys that have been there and done that for you and been productive too. I don't think that any of the players the Lions acquired this offseason are has-beens or guys who clearly have little left in the tank. No, again, as I was saying, there was a time where there was a case for Jamie Collins as the defensive player of the year in football last year. Danny Shelton performed at a high level. Deron Harmon, a guy that's an effective piece and has been basically every single game in his career. So I know that people sometimes latch on to the familiarity and maybe want to attribute it as, maybe try to draw a certain connotation to it. I think it's sort of expected in life and in general, and especially in football.
That is a great point about the possible limitations teams may have on practices should this continue into the summer and bringing in players who are already familiar with what you want to run. Now, draft is coming up. Time to talk about that. We're kind of figuring out what that will look like right now. How do you think what the Lions did in free agency could affect what they're looking at that number 3 pick and beyond it?
Yeah, it's funny. I've spent a lot of time imagining what's going through Bob Quinn's head right now, and I almost feel like I'm watching an old version of the World Series of Poker, and Bob's at the final table and sort of staring down others, but he's got the largest stack of chips. And I get it. Make no mistake. You don't want to go you don't want to finish with the 3rd pick in the draft. You don't want to go 3-12-1 during a regular season. I think anybody inside that building will be the first person to tell you that. But you are dealing with a certain set of cards right now, or I guess a certain set of poker chips, as I just alluded to. And I think a lot of people who are evaluating this draft class believe that there are 3 really, really unique prospects in terms of what their value would be if they reach the apex of their value. And those would be Joe Burrow, the presumptive number 1 selection out of LSU, Chase Young, the presumptive 2nd selection out of Ohio State, and then Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback out of Alabama, who certainly has some medical question marks, but at his best could be the most productive quarterback in this draft. And let's just look again at the money. Quarterbacks make the most money out of anybody in the league. So the value of a very, very good one is higher than the value of a player at a different position. If you're the Lions, you've got a quarterback. So if Joe Burrow and Chase Young are picks 1 and 2, and someone's saying, I want Tua Tagovailoa, the Lions, of course, and I'm sure you've thought about this a lot, and it's been discussion of fodder and in local coverage, is the possibility of at least entertaining trade offers. And nothing has to happen for sure, but I do think it's really the ante-up spot is pick 3 in this year's draft. And to close a circle on this, if I'm the Lions right now, assuming things go as forecasted, and I'm no Mel Kiper, let's be clear, but if they go as forecasted 1-2, then I would not be surprised if wherever Bob Quinn is located during the draft, and I know we're working through logistics of that, if that phone line is burning up for at least 9 of the 10 minutes they have to make that selection, or 14 of the 15 minutes. I've lost track of how many minutes they actually get for that first round pick. But anyways, most of that time could be spent hammering out a potential trade, just given the value of adding additional picks going forward.
Well, we are looking forward to draft week. We'll all find out what happens there at the end of April. Field, thank you so much for spending some time with us on Skype.
No problem, Tori. Glad to do it.